Your body's immune system and its function has to have a certain amount of juice. If you have strength, then you have health. If you have strength and health, then you have a certain amount of personal power. All right, so it's a simple equation. If you have this personal power, then you have a power over yourself. And that's where happiness comes from. It's freedom of self-conflict. It's very hard to have the discipline of mind if you don't have the discipline of body. You really need to cultivate the visible self before you can understand and basically be in strong relationship with the invisible self. There's visible, there's invisible. But a lot of us want to go right into adjusting the invisible self when they don't take the time to establish a relationship with the visible self. Now this is a key piece because the ego is very tricky. And so anytime you start looking at any aspect of its negative characteristics and try to dissolve them, there becomes a lot of like self-imagination, self-sales, self-story, and self-convincing that just kicks right in. Okay, so we have to understand getting past that fight and having a freedom of the inner conflict and the story is a big, big piece. Okay, so no freedom, no peace. So you have to have power to have freedom, and you have to have freedom to have peace. It is a prerequisite requirement when we talk about alchemy of now, and so that we can drop into now without this excessive suffering. See, the human being has some very powerful tools. One of them is, of course, that freedom, which is a free will. You can say animals have a free will within reason, but a human being can actually create stuff. So if a human being wants to move to the other part of the world, it actually can. It's very, very hard for a cow, okay? Unless he's, packaged up in steaks and sent to Japan. And so that's like a whole other, that wasn't his will. So a human being has will. And the will isn't something that even God can take away. So it's a very powerful thing. But with that willpower, we have choices. And with the choices, what we do tend to develop and cultivate is our imagination and our memory. So it's our imagination and our memory that robs us and provides us with our freedom. So what does that mean? A lot of times our imagination is projecting into the future and it creates a tremendous amount of suffering. So that's imagination, as opposed to imagining how to feed the hungry. We tend to also imagine all kinds of negative stuff that creates unnecessary suffering that often never happens. Have you ever noticed that? If you really worry about things, 9 out of 10 times it actually doesn't happen, but you live it as if it did. So right there, you're not free of your mind and your imagination. You're in a cage. So therefore, you really can't be peaceful. So that's a big problem. Then there's memory. We have a memory, which again works because we can remember cause and effect and where we, hid the seeds or whatever we did. That's a big piece of our survival. But we have a choice. So we also remember negative and remember, our story and loop our story. So as you know, a lot of the stuff that we talk about is the same thing over and over again in our head. So memory and imagination tend to be a big source of our suffering. So the only way we can get out of that involuntary memory or imagination is through the skillful means of moving, standing, and sitting. The moving practices help us remove the cellular memory that kind of bubbles up. It's like, where did that come from? It's literally in the body. So moving helps. Also, the moving helps us deal with the physical discomfort of the body. Promoting the circulation, the lymphatic system, removing inflammation, all of that stuff. So that in itself kind of removes a lot of internal dialogue. The standing creates the will. Right? We talk about this all the time. So when you stand, you burn, and when you burn, you develop the nervous system that is strong enough then to basically withstand the fight, the conflict. So you have the discipline. It all really does begin with discipline. And then, of course, the seated practices help us learn how to mindfully drop into the now. So those are our ingredients to the elixir that removes the suffering.